It was the summer of 2009. I was fresh out of a marriage that I jumped into too quickly, and I was looking to find myself again. So I called my two oldest siblings who lived in New York City and told them I was coming for a visit. Needless to say, they were elated. I only had to pay for my bus ticket there. It was cheap, and I had a good job at the time, so I was able to purchase it on a whim. I packed my suitcase so full I could barely zip it, with all of my favorite summer clothes, jewelry, and makeup. I got to the bus station, and all was well. The lady at the customer service desk handed over my ticket, and I waited for my bus departure to be announced. Along the way, on the bus, we made a few rest stops. We eventually got to our transfer station in Philly. That was where things got weird. Everyone transferring buses got off, and a new group got on. I saw a lot of strange-looking people, but none of them stood out like this one. This one guy had long, scraggly brown hair, thick glasses, and a wild beard. He wasn't bad smelling or homeless looking. In fact, he was quite well put together, and he smelled of cologne. But he just had this creepy serial killer lumberjack vibe about him. Whenever I travel, I like to take the window seat. It's my thing, and lo and behold, the creepy guy sat right next to me. He started to talk. It was innocent enough. I'm not much of a talker by nature, so I listened. He talked about his sister's wedding, stating that he had just attended it in Philly. He told me he was on his way back home in New York City. I smiled and nodded. He then said in the creepiest whisper I've ever heard,
"I'm going to kiss you now."
Before I could respond, or even react, he planted his lips onto mine. His scruffy beard scratched my face. I yelped in horror and punched him as hard as I could in the arm. He let out a loud laugh. Then he said he loved me, and he said he knew I was the one. I had never seen this man before in my life, and I didn't know him from a can of paint. It became very clear to me that this guy was mentally disturbed. I stood up to cross over him, and went to complain to the driver. Then a young woman appeared a few seats behind us on the bus and profusely apologized. She claimed he was her cousin, and he had a mental disability. She offered to trade seats with me, and I accepted. The whole time, he was laughing, and his laugh just got louder and more disturbing by the second. That was the end of my interaction with them, but at the next stop, I was getting off the bus, and I walked past their seats and saw them making out. They were whispering and laughing. They were really strange people. I don't know if they were really cousins or not, but I was glad to make it to New York City and see my big bro at the station waiting for me. I ran into his arms, clearly shaken. He asked me what was wrong, but I never told him exactly what happened. Nevertheless, he and my sister tried to comfort me, but I wouldn't spill it. I've been a frequent flyer ever since this incident occurred. Even thinking about it gives me the creeps. This happened last summer when I was 14. I'm in Boy Scouts, and we were taking a train to Oregon. We were going to Camp Makawala. I was with my friend Ethan, who was 12, but he looked like he was around 8. We went to the lounge car on the train, where there were more of our troop. We sat down and ordered some pizza. We were chilling and started playing poker when a man wearing a hoodie came over and sat down next to us. I couldn't quite see his face until he looked up. He looked like he was in his late 20s, and he was carrying a box of beer with him and some pizza. He was nearly bald and looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. His eyes were wild and blue, like White Walker blue. He started mumbling something to himself when my friend Cameron tried to move away. Then he yelled,
"Don't touch my beers."
Cameron moved away and apologized. He said he didn't really touch them, and then he started mumbling to himself again, and then he said,
"Do you have a BCV radio?"
One of our patrol leaders said no, and then the man said,
"It's a damn good radio. Incredibly powerful thing."
He started mumbling again, and then he asked if any of us brought our knives. I felt for my knife in my pocket and began to bring it out and was about to hand it to him. Then my patrol leader nudged me and told me not to. Then the man went quiet and occasionally mumbled something to himself. I got my pizza, and we continued playing poker when Ethan, who was dealing the cards, walked around and went by me. My eyes wandered over to the man, who was staring intently at Ethan with an insane look in his eyes. It was like he was thinking, "I'm gonna skin you alive." I was amused, but a bit creeped out by this. I'm really good at making insane looks because I'm an actor, so I gave him the same look, but jokingly. Then he turned and gave me the same look he was giving Ethan. At this point I was creeped out. I told my patrol leader, and he said, "I know. All the patrol leaders told their scouts to leave slowly, one by one. I was going to tell your patrol as well." We left one by one, and when we got back to our seats, we started talking about how creepy it was. Speaking of the devil, the man started walking down our aisle. Me and Ethan were sitting next to each other. The man stopped by our seats and wrote down our seat number on a notepad or something. Me and Ethan were really creeped, especially Ethan. I wanted to protect him. I'm big and muscular, but I was an unarmed 14-year-old who was 5'8". This dude was 6'2", far more muscular, and possibly armed. It was about midnight, and I was going to sleep. The lights were off, and everyone else was asleep, but I stayed up, because I wanted to protect Ethan in case that man came by. I was literally 2 blinks away from going to sleep myself when I saw the man's reflection in my window. He was 2 feet from me. I thought it was a hallucination, but when I turned around, I could see the guy. He walked in front of me, and he was about to start picking up Ethan. That was when I realized what was about to happen. I hit the recliner button on my seat and closed it as fast as I could. It crushed his feet, and I heard a crack. He made a noise in pain, and I pushed him down. He fell onto the aisle and made a grunt. Then he ran down the aisle to another car. I would have screamed or told someone, but I was too tired, so I went to sleep. An hour later, I woke up, and the man was again in front of me. He was already lifting up Ethan. When I realized what was happening again, I flipped and started yelling. He dropped Ethan back into his chair. I hit the recliner button again, but he was already on his way back down the aisle. My patrol leader heard me yelling and asked what happened. I explained to him, and he told me to go back to sleep. I did. I woke up about 2 hours later, and I heard my patrol leader telling the dude to basically F off. I went back to sleep and woke up at around 7 a.m. We had just gotten into Oregon, and we were about 3 hours away from the camp. The man was gone, and I asked my patrol leader what happened. This is what he told me. The dude went back to the lounge car and chilled out there for a bit. A Cub Scout, who was about 9 years old, walked down to get a late-night snack. The man saw the Cub Scout and followed him. The Cub Scout went into the bathroom, and the man followed him in and started banging on the stall, telling him to let him in. The Cub Scout just got a phone call from his dad, and he told him what was going on. The dad, who was also on the train, rushed in, and the man backed off. The cops were called, and at the next stop, they boarded the train, and my patrol leader gave them a statement about what happened. The police found the man hiding in the luggage car. He snuck onto the train and had 3 knives on him. I don't know what happened next with the man. We went to the camp and had a fun time, but I had some anxiety attacks. Months later, I visited a therapist who diagnosed me with PTSD and anxiety. I'm still in Boy Scouts, and I've tried to work through it, which I think I almost have. I rarely get triggered, but it does still happen. This is a story that happened to me when I was in primary school. I'm 37 now, so it was the late 90s. I took the school bus every day, which was fine with me because some of my friends were on the same bus. I didn't like the driver though. He was a tall, gruff man with a bushy beard and a stern expression. I'd always found him a little scary. He never said much, and I really got the idea that he didn't like kids. I didn't know why he wanted to be a bus driver, but maybe he didn't have any other options. As we rode to school, I noticed that my friend Chase was fidgeting in his seat. He was kind of a class clown. Chase was really popular around school because he knew how to make everyone laugh. He was folding up little pieces of paper into airplanes and tossing them around in the bus. I giggled at first, but then I started to feel uneasy. I didn't want to get in trouble. But Chase didn't seem to care. He was laughing and shouting, and I could tell that the other kids on the bus were loving it. Chase would always feed off of that kind of energy. I tried to get him to calm down, but he just ignored me. I looked up at the driver. I could see his eyes in the mirror above his head. He was mad. I could see the rage in his eyes, but I didn't think anyone else saw it. Chase kept causing a scene and threw another paper airplane to another one of our friends. This one came really close to the driver, and I saw him flinch when it did. Suddenly, the bus screeched to a halt. I looked up and saw the driver storming down the aisle, his face red with anger. He grabbed Chase by the shirt collar and lifted him up out of his seat. I could see the fear in his eyes. The driver let him go and stood there for a moment. Then he turned around and walked off the bus. We were in a somewhat rural area. There was an apple orchard on one side of the street and a residential neighborhood on the other. To this day, I don't know where that driver went. We all sat there stunned in silence for a moment, and then the other kids started to whisper and giggle. I leaned over to Chase and asked him if he was okay. He nodded, but I could see that he was still shaken up. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there quietly for about half an hour. Eventually another bus pulled up next to ours, and we all filed onto it. It was business as usual at school that day, and we all talked about what happened over lunch and recess. We later found out that the driver had a criminal record. He had been convicted of assault and battery several years ago, but he lied on his application to become a bus driver. It's hard to understand how that was possible, but it was the 90s, and we didn't really have computers yet. Not in the way we do now. I like to think that this kind of mistake couldn't happen anymore, but who knows. Of course, the driver was fired immediately, but I don't think charges were ever laid, even though he assaulted a 12-year-old boy with dozens of witnesses. Like I said, it was the 90s. I had just finished a long day at work, and I was looking forward to getting home so I could relax. As I was walking to the bus stop, I noticed a man walking behind me. I didn't think much of it at first, but it was dark, and everything seems creepier in the dark. I tried to speed up, but he matched my pace. I turned around to get a better look at him, and he immediately stopped and looked away. He was around average height but overweight, and probably around 50 years old. He wore a black winter hat, even though it was spring. He also wore a gray sweatshirt and jeans. I quickened my pace and made it to the bus stop, hoping he would leave me alone, but he didn't. The man followed me onto the bus and sat a few rows behind me. I tried to ignore him and focused on my phone, but I felt like he was staring at me. I took a quick glance behind me, and I was right. He was glaring right at me. He didn't even look away when I made eye contact. It made me feel uncomfortable and paranoid. The bus ride seemed to take forever, but I was scared to get off. When my stop finally arrived, I got off the bus and started walking towards my apartment. But once again, the man followed me. I could hear his footsteps behind me, and I looked back nervously every few steps. I panicked and ran towards the nearest store. Once I got inside, I told the cashier what was happening. I didn't want to call the police just yet, but I knew I needed help. I waited nervously, watching the door for any sign of the man. Minutes felt like hours, but I didn't see him again. I waited for another 10 minutes in the store, then I set out from my apartment. You may be wondering why I didn't call an Uber or something. My apartment was only 1 block away, so I thought it wouldn't really help. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't help but feel scared and vulnerable, but I made it there, and I didn't see the man again. The next few days were filled with anxiety and fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there watching me. I became paranoid and started looking over my shoulder every few seconds. I took a different route to and from work, and I even changed my schedule to avoid being in the same place at the same time every day. It was exhausting, but I didn't want to take any chances. Weeks went by, and I thought I had finally put the incident behind me. I had resumed my normal routine, and I was no longer so worried and paranoid. But one day, as I was walking to the bus stop, I saw him again. That same man from before was walking towards me. He was walking quickly, and I could see the determination in his eyes. I turned to head back to my apartment, but he caught up to me and was soon right behind me.
Carrie,
He said. I didn't want to stop or look back, and I have no idea how he knew my name. I burst into a full-on sprint. I couldn't go to my apartment with him on my tail, so I did a lap around the neighborhood until I was sure I had lost him. Like I said before, he was somewhat overweight, and I was able to outrun him pretty easily. When I got into my apartment, I collapsed on the couch and cried. I finally called the police and reported what had been happening. I was worried that I had a stalker. The creepiest part was that he knew my name. That was seriously concerning. This only happened a few weeks ago, and I haven't heard back from the police. I haven't seen the man again either, but I'm really worried whenever I go out, especially at night.